Hi guys, I'm Darren, and in this video we're going to be talking about modes in iNav. So in this video we're going to talk about modes. This is something I have covered in the past, but with the release of iNav 3 there were some new things introduced and people are a bit unclear about it. And I've also seen from forums that people are still a bit unclear about the original modes in the first place. So we're going to look at modes in relation to iNav, in particular with iNav 3 going forward. So what I will do is cover an overview. We won't go into too much depth with most of this stuff, but we're going to have a look at what each thing is. So probably the easiest thing to do is just to have a look in iNav. And what we can see straight away is there's quite a few different things. People often just refer to these as flight modes, but that's not quite the case because there's a lot of different things. If you go through the list, what we actually have is some arming modes, then we have some flight modes, some navigation modes, some tuning modes. In there, there's also some modifiers. Then we have like functions rather than modes. So we have, for example, the beep or the OSD. They're not flight modes, they're functions that we can operate via a switch. So there's a lot of things that go into modes. They've all just been bundled together, but we need to sort of differentiate between what we're actually dealing with. So the first thing that we've got is arm and pre-arm. Now these are our arming modes. So pre-arm basically is a parameter that needs to be met before you can actually use the arm switch and arm. An arm is pretty obvious when it's in the arm position. If everything is good to go, you can arm. So that's pretty basic. There's not a lot to talk about there. Then we get on to our actual flight modes. So we have angle, horizon and manual. Now you may think actually there's one missing. Where's Acro? And we'll be getting onto that a little bit later on in the video. But yeah, you're right, our four actual flight modes are manual, acro, horizon and angle. And that's in an order of stabilization effectively. So let's talk about manual first of all. Manual is you have complete control of the aircraft. Your stick movements go straight through. They don't go through the PID controller, so there's no stabilization whatsoever. Whatever you do on the sticks goes straight to the control surfaces. All that is applied is manual expo, the manual rates, the mixer, and that's basically it. Everything else is just bypassed. So manual really is a mode where you're in direct control of the aircraft. When we go one step further, we enter acro mode, which is also known as rate mode. This is not air mode. People still refer to acro as air mode, but it's not. Air mode isn't a flight mode at all, but we will get onto that a little bit later as well. So with acro, you're basically introducing the PID controller. So what that's adding is stabilization. So it'll take out sort of wind buffeting, that sort of thing. That's what you get with acro. So that just takes it that little step further. The next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to skip horizon for a second and we're going to talk about angle. Now angle is a stabilized flight mode which also self-levels. So if you let go of the sticks, it will level the model and fly straight and level basically. So this was set up traditionally using board alignment to get everything level. So you would add usually sort of like a negative between 4 and 8 degrees to get the nose pointing up and it to fly straight and level. That's now moved in iNav 3.0. Board alignment, as I mentioned in my board alignment video, is just used now for the orientation of the flight controller. We have another mode that actually will help us set the angle of attack in our model. So yeah, angle is a stabilized flight mode with self-leveling, and you can control how strong the leveling is in the PID tuning. The mode I missed out is horizon, and the reason I missed that out is because it's basically a combination of acro and angle mode. So I will dive into the PID tuning just quickly to look at this, and what you see down here is a horizon transition. So the 75 is actually a percentage of movement on your control stick. So if you move it the first 75%, you're in angle mode. Once you get past that 75%, you're in acro. So that's how horizon works. It's really just a combination of acro and angle. And while we're here, here's the angle strength, so you can adjust how strong the self-leveling is there. So let's head back to modes, and we've basically covered our standard flight modes. And we can see here grey and blue boxes. We'll cover that again a little bit later in this video, so don't worry about that at the moment. After our flight modes, we have some navigation modes. Now these are modes where we're not in full control of the aircraft. The flight controller itself is flying the plane for the most part. So the top one here is Nav RTH, which is return to home, which basically when you put the switch in the RTH position, the plane will fly back to you and loiter around home or land, depending on how you set it up. Again, I'm not going to dive deep into return to home in this video because it's quite an in-depth subject. There's quite a few options with it, so I'm going to save that for another time. But all you really need to know is, as long as you're past a certain threshold, which is a certain distance away from home, it will turn around and come back to you. If you're too close, it will just do an emergency land. The next one is Nav Pos Hold, which people sort of generally call Loiter. And what that will do is fly circles in the sky. So again, you're not in control here at all. So the top two, RTH and Pos Hold, the flight controller is doing everything. One thing you can do with Loiter is change the direction. So if you go into advanced tuning, down here you've got either left or right, which is how it starts off, or you can have yaw. And what yaw means is basically you can choose which direction you want it to loiter. So if it starts loitering to the right, move the yaw stick to the left and it will start loitering to the left. So simple as that. Next up, I'm going to skip again. We're going to go straight to Nav Course Hold. And what Course Hold does is literally just holds the current course. It will just literally point in the direction that you're in when you enable it, and it will just hold that course. Now, Course Hold doesn't have any altitude hold. For that, you would use Nav Cruise, which is basically the same as Course Hold, but it also has altitude hold. So there are navigation modes. Next up, we have Nav Alt Hold. Now, Alt Hold is not a flight mode. I've heard quite a few times of people who have literally just had Alt Hold on a switch, which is really not a good idea. It's because basically what you're flying then is acro with altitude hold added, and altitude hold was never made to be used with acro. It's not designed to deal with the quick change in directions that you can have with acro. The only mode that you would really use altitude hold with now is angle. You could mix it with course hold, which is what people used to do in the old iNav. They'd use cruise and altitude hold to get 3D cruise. But you really don't need to do that anymore. You can just use course hold or cruise. So altitude hold is pretty much almost a redundant flight mode, because there's not really much point using it with angle. You can get angle tuned quite well to hold altitudes pretty well, but also if you're just going to fly in a direction and want everything held, you just use cruise. For that purpose, it's much better than angle. Angle is for sort of having leisurely flights, I guess, where you still want to be in control and just fly about, meander where you want to go. It's, yeah. Heading hold is, again, something that's pretty redundant these days. You would really just use Nav Cruise or Nav Course Hold now. There's really no need to have heading hold at all. Don't really know why it's still here. But again, heading hold is a modifier. So you would have in the old days had heading hold and had it active the same time as angle. So you'd have angle, alt hold and heading hold. And yeah, but cruise actually, or course hold and cruise works slightly different to heading hold, and cruise and course hold give you a much better lock on target. So one modifier that's not actually here because I have it permanently enabled is Airmode. If you don't have it permanently enabled, it will appear in the list here, so you can use it on a switch. But Airmode is actually a modifier. It is not a flight mode. So with Airmode, what it does is keep your stabilization active and responsive when the throttle is low. So you'll get more movement on the control surface for stabilization when air mode is enabled and the throttle's low compared to when it isn't. So if your throttle's down and you're gliding in, it will still give you that responsive stabilization. That's basically what air mode is doing. So after that, we'll move on from the flight mode modifiers to our sort of mission or control systems like that. So we have nav waypoint mission. So that is, you set up a mission in mission control, upload it to your flight controller, throw your plane or take off if it's got wheels, enable nav WP, and it will go and fly your mission. So that's completely autonomous. That is like a waypoint mission. And GCS nav is for ground stations. Now we enter the function section of the modes. So we get home reset, which if you put a range on it, when you're in the range, it will reset the home position. We then have a couple of tuning modes. So auto level is the mode I was referring to earlier. So if I put it in auto level mode, what I'd generally be doing is flying in angle, and I would take my hands off the sticks, just let it go for about 10 seconds and watch the digital vario. So on a nice calm day, you'll see it pretty much stay at 0 on the digital vario. Sometimes it might vary between sort of plus or minus 0.2, but once you get it to that as close to 0 as possible, you can disable auto level and carry on flying. So that's the way I use it as a tuning mode. Some people have put it on with angle, so whenever they're flying in angle, it's always on, but it's still sort of recommended at this early stage just to have it as a tuning mode. So when you land, if you do it on a nice calm day, when you land, just do a save and it will save that in the flight controller. The next up, we have auto tune. This is something that you're probably used to with older versions of iNav. You'll just put it into the auto tune mode, put your model for its paces, and it will tune the PID controller for you. Again, one thing missing from this screen, because I've got it permanently enabled, is auto trim. This again was introduced in iNav 3.0. So you can now have auto trim permanently enabled, or you can do it on a switch the old school way. Permanently enabled seems to work really well. So basically, if you're not putting any inputs on the stick, so center gimbals, it will use the integral to work out where the error is and then trim the plane using that. It's quite a nice system, and I've not had any issues with it whatsoever. I've not ended up with wildly out of trim planes. It's just worked as it's supposed to. So that's what I did. Where I have auto level is where I used to have auto trim. So I've literally just swapped those modes over, and that works really well. If you did want to do it the old-fashioned way, just on configuration, just down the bottom, if you disable that, you'll get auto trim back on the mode screen. Next up, we have launch mode. Again, this is something that you can have permanently enabled, but I personally prefer to have it on a switch. Just the way I like to do things. This is, it's up to you, it's personal preference. But I just like being in control of when I use it and when I don't, especially where I've got a range of different models. Some of them, like mini AR wing, I don't bother with it, just stick it in angle or acro or whatever, and give it, 3/4 throttle, throw it, and that's it, it's gone. It doesn't really need it, but bigger planes, like mini Talon, that sort of thing, would benefit from auto launch. If you take a look at some of Adam G's videos where he's launching his Crosswind Mini, he'll stick it in auto launch, put his transmitter on the floor, pick it up. He's got it set up and just dialed. So his auto launch, he's added the idle throttle delay. So he's got a timeout so he can put the transmitter on the floor, pick the model up. After a delay, the idle will start, throw the model, and off it goes. And it just works spot on. So yeah, nav launch is just launch mode. So now we get on to some lesser used items. So we have loiter change, which you can set this up, and if it enters that range, it will just change the direction of the loiter. Personally, I don't really see the point of it. You might as well just set loiter direction up as yaw, and then use a yaw stick, saves a channel. Why, duplicate something? So next we have something that I don't really know why it's in here with a fixed wing. We have FPV angle mix, which is for a multi-rotor, so that it basically adjusts stuff based on the angle that it's flying at. Turn assist is for fixed wing, so Basically, that adds in coordinated turns. So if you roll the plane, it will add a bit of rudder just to kick it round and coordinate your turns rather than you doing it manually. Surface head free and head adjust, again, these are multi-rotor things, no idea what are in there. Right, beeper is so you can turn your beeper on and off. So if you lose your model, you can add a range to this, and if you activate the mode, it will sound a beeper for you. Beepers aren't usually that loud, so you're probably better off with a proper lost model alarm, and those things are deafening, so much better. But if you don't have that, but you have a beeper, it's a useful option. Next up, we have some OSD options. So we have OSD off, which surprisingly enough turns off the OSD in that position. Then with nothing selected, it's default OSD, then all OSDs 1, 2 and 3. So you can have 5 different OSDs basically, including off, default, 1, 2, 3. So yeah, 5 positions. Camstab is I believe it's so you can set up like a gimbal type thing. It's a very basic gimbal. Then we have some more specific stuff like camera control. We have Blackbox, which if you have a SD card in your plane and you don't want it recording all the time, you can add a on-off switch for it here. What I usually do is just set this up the same as my arm switch, so it only starts recording when it's armed. We have Failsafe, which is basically a mode for you to test out the Failsafe procedure. What it will basically do, once you enter that, it triggers whatever you've got set in here. So it will return to home or drop or land. Whatever you've got it set to, is to test out this procedure right here. And finally, that we can see here at the moment, we have Killswitch, which basically, if you enter that mode, it will disarm and not let you rearm until you power cycle. So there was one mode missing because I don't actually have LEDs set up on this plane. And that is, again, with the regular switches, we have LEDs off. It used to be LEDs low and people didn't really get what that means. So changing it to LEDs off, yeah, if you put the range in there, your LEDs turn off. If it's not in that range, they're on. So that's a basic understanding of what the modes actually do. But now, as I mentioned earlier, we can talk about the ranges and something that actually confuses people. So what you have is a set of ranges. You have grey where you haven't got anything set up. So you can see like horizon, I've not got anything set up. If I add a range, it'll go to dark grey. If I delete it, because I don't like horizon, it goes to light grey. Next up, we have inside the range, obviously you set the area that you want it to activate in. And then finally, you have this little blue pip, which shows where your switch position is on that channel. So when I'm switching through, you can see angle and manual are lighting up blue. But if I go to return to home, you can see it isn't. And this confuses a lot of people because they think return to home's not going to work because it's not lighting up blue. Actually, it will do. This is iNav 3.0.2. So at this point in time, making the video, it's the latest version of iNav out there. And all previous versions have done exactly the same thing. If a flight controller can't actually enter the mode at this time, you don't get the blue, it just stays that grey colour. But things can change. So if you look up here, this is actually the latest master. This is iNav 4.0. And at the moment, it looks very similar. So you can see I'm in angle, that's lit up blue. If I go to manual, that's also lit up blue. If I go to return to home, hang on, that's also lit up a dark blue. So what you've got coming in iNav 4.0 is we have a bit more feedback to let us know that we can activate a mode. So this dark blue color means that when everything is good and the flight controller can enter return to home, it will. We're in a range that works, so there's no problem. The light blue color is the flight controller saying, yeah, I'm in that mode. So again, you can see with course hold, there's nothing there, cruise nothing, position hold nothing, Waypoints, nothing, but angle works. Another thing that you may have noticed on this screen is we now have an indicator for Acro. So if I come out of all the flight modes, you can see that this now lights up blue, meaning that we would be in Acro. That was something that's been missing again since the dawn of iNav. But now we can see when we're actually in Acro. So you can see as soon as I get into a different flight mode, it changes status. So yep, we now have Acro indicators, and we also have indicators that we would actually be in a working flight mode. While we're on this screen, one other thing that is quite cool is we can now hide modes that we're not actually using. So that it just makes it nice and easy to find what we want. So we don't have to go trawling through a big page of modes now just to see the ones we want to see. Just to do a quick check to make sure we've got everything. So there we go. I hope you guys found this video useful, and I hope it made it clear what the modes actually do. So thank you very much for watching, guys. See you on the next one. Fly your models like you stole them.